The wall clock ticked like a light tap along the spine. Wind from Lake Erie hissed through the window pane, carrying a cold, salty breath into Ms. Sandra Klein's probate room. On the table in front of me, an urn, a bank envelope swollen with papers, and a flash drive small as a hard-to-swallow scrap of memory. Cleveland, 2 weeks after the funeral, I reminded myself, so my hands wouldn't shake as Ms. Sandra plugged in the USB and opened the laptop. The screen flashed, then showed a warning line. Unusual pattern alert. Senior account. Consecutive ATM withdrawals. Dev Patel from the bank rewound the frames from that night. A figure in a beanie, tilting a shoulder to hide the face, making back-to-back withdrawals at a Detroit Shoreway ATM. I knew that gait. I knew that jacket. And I knew the feeling in my chest at the moment of realization. Jordan, my brother. Ms. Sandra spread out the will, her voice steady like rearranging chairs. Last will and testament, Marion Blake. The will divides equally. She placed another sheet down. But the pod, 98,400, is gone. Jordan drew a breath, spoke quickly. Mom gave me the card. She wanted me to handle things. Ms. Sandra looked up. Then why does the audit record an attempt to change the beneficiary at 0003? Blocked for lack of verification. I looked at the urn, thought of the ventilator sound on the last night, and understood that some things in silence also know how to tell it back. Cameras, system logs, exact minutes. I am Nora. If I have to name the breaking point, it is here. Amid the smell of freshly printed paper and the lake wind rushing, when a USB weighs more than the whole room, and a question light as a knife. Where did the money go, and why was it right when Mom was still breathing? The screen closed like an eyelid. If you want to understand why 0003 haunts me so, step back. The Lakewood kitchen and Mom's sticky note. Saturday mornings in Tremont and Ohio City always have Cleveland's own rhythm. Not hurried, not showy, just steady-handed. I line up at the takeout coffee counter. The heat steams up my face while wind from Lake Erie blows over the brick incline, carrying the smell of butter and scallions from the pierogi trays at West Side Market along the arched hallway. People wear orange-brown Browns coats, scarves knitted by their grandmothers themselves, talking about the weather like a proper ritual. I was born here, where steel once glowed in the furnaces and train whistles threaded through kitchen talk. Where my mother, Marion, spent her life at St. Vincent Charity, her steps familiar with the smell of rubbing alcohol and the click of hospital bed latches. She didn't earn much, but she knew how to arrange things, checking to pay the bills. Pod savings left for the two of you, a phrase she often repeated, matter of fact as the truth of a tablecloth already ironed flat. Cleveland taught us not to boast. My mother taught me that discipline is a kind of gentleness. In the afternoon, the small house in Lakewood glowed warm. The heater hissed. The window looked out on a patch of grass with a weathered wooden chair. Mom stood at the stove assembling Jell-O salad for the church group. Canned pineapple cut into cubes, a few grapes, a layer of sour cream, whipped smooth, her hands working from a long memory more than from any written recipe. Jordan drove Mom to her routine checkup, came back along Madison Ave, stopping to buy more milk and a discounted bunch of tulips. I stayed behind to tidy the table, my notebook open in the middle of the kitchen, starting to fill with small notes, medication times, follow-up dates, the doctor's instructions rewritten so they wouldn't slip away. After COVID, Mom sometimes got lightly confused, mentioning something twice, asking what day it was when the calendar hung right on the wall, rummaging in her purse for the card already tucked in her coat pocket. At first, I thought she was tired. Later, I stuck a small note next to the refrigerator. Morning, blood pressure. Noon, vitamins. Night, blood sugar. Mom looked and laughed. Marion's daughter is just like her mother, likes paperwork. I laughed too, but my hand lingered longer on the cabinet edge, as if wanting to hold on to something that was slipping very slowly. We weren't rich, but our home was orderly. Bills went into a tin box, envelopes color-coded, electricity yellow, water blue, trash gray. On the lid, Mom stuck a slanted handwriting sticky note. "This money is for you two to start your own lives when I'm gone. Don't use it for anything else." Every time I dusted the lid, that sentence lit up like a safety line. Jordan spoke little, with a quick, efficient manner. He hauled for acquaintances, picked up extra hours, and drove Mom as his share in the family. I noted the church meetings where Mom carried the Jell-O tray around, everyone calling her by name. I also noted the nights when Lake Erie blew a cold that stiffened doors, and Mom still called to me, "Don't forget your hat," her voice both stern and gentle like a quilted blanket. There were light red flags mixed into life. Mom asked for the TV password, and then forgot it right away. Mom signed in the notes field instead of on the signature line. Mom told a story from a shift 10 years ago as if it had just finished this morning. I didn't panic. I kept a slow beat, set the pillbox by week, turned on reminders on the phone, asked the doctor to print the prescriptions clearly and explain them again in plain words. On Sunday night, I poured 2 cups of tea, sat next to Mom to straighten the drawer. On the left were insurance papers, on the right, the savings book. She held the bank envelope tight, saying, "This is for the 2 of you," as if watching a boat whose mooring line had been firmly tied. I looked at the corner of the table still dusted with gelatin powder and thought to myself, in Cleveland, perseverance is the common language. When the streets freeze, we walk slowly. When hearts wobble, we put the papers back in order. And I believe that as long as we hold to the small habits, we will keep Mom's voice sounding steady in this house. Not loud, not ornate, just clear and in the right place. 2 weeks before my mother died, everything began with small ding sounds from the bank that I almost ignored. Phone banking reported, "Email on file updated." I hadn't changed anything. I called the hotline, answered 3 verification questions. The person on the line said in a standard tone, "The system records the change from the mobile app." I wrote in my notebook, Saturday, 10:06 a.m. Email changed, not me. That night, debit alerts lit up repeatedly in the 0014 as 0029 window. The first time, a small withdrawal at an ATM, then 2 more repeating exactly like a memorized drumbeat. I took screenshots, sent them to the family group. Jordan replied, "That's spam, don't worry." Then with his own hands, he went into Mom's phone to turn off notifications, saying, "Mom is tired. Let her sleep." I held the phone gone completely silent, sensing an unhealthy quiet like a cold pane of glass laid on the forehead of someone with a fever. The montage pace of those 2 weeks sped up, like Cleveland heading into a snowstorm. Wind from Lake Erie hissed harder through the door cracks, and people had to walk with heads bowed. In the morning, I pushed open the hospice room door, the smell of disinfectant and dried chrysanthemums mixed together. Marion was sedated. The monitor beeped slowly, a steady rhythm like someone tapping the bed frame. I gently smoothed lotion onto my mother's fingertips and started when I saw the bruising on the tips. Small circular marks, the soft spots slightly inflamed, like the imprint of some device that demanded fingerprints many times until it agreed to unlock. I asked the nurse. She shook her head. "We don't use fingerprints for patients here." The doctor wrote in the chart, "Patient is sedated, lacks capacity." I said nothing more, just took Mom's phone to check and saw the biometrics item had been turned on recently. I breathed into my mask. The fabric smell woke me up. Then I wrote in the notebook, "Hospice. Mom's fingertips bruised? Fingerprints? On the chair in the corner of the room, Jordan folded a bank envelope into his coat pocket. So clumsily the paper scraped the brown fabric. "Clinic fees," he said. I nodded, didn't argue, just noted the timestamp. 3:40 p.m. White envelope, bank logo. On the weekend night, the chain of debit alerts appeared again in the exact same time window, like a clock set in advance. I called the bank again, requested a card freeze. The call center woman asked for the reason. I said irregularities. The confirmation text for the freeze had just arrived when Jordan snatched the phone from Mom's hand, turning it toward himself. "Mom already signed POA for me. Let me handle these things." I looked straight at him and asked, "Which POA? Where was it notarized? What's the notary's name?" He was silent for exactly 3 monitor beeps, then deflected. "Don't make this hard at a time like this." I didn't raise my voice. I opened the notebook and added one more line. "Jordan says there is a POA. Has not provided a notary. In Cleveland, when the storm hits, people drive in more nails and stuff more cloth into the door jambs." My job was to stuff more words into the blanks. The next days were fragments falling into the right places to expose the underlayer. Email updated, notifications turned off, withdrawals after midnight, bruised fingerprints, bank envelope. I went back and forth between Lakewood and the hospice, carrying a labeled pill box and a rubber-banded pouch of papers. The doctor called me out into the hallway, said, "Your mother hurts less when she's sleeping. Do you want to let her hear anything?" I played a hymn Mom liked, the singing thin as thread. I sat hugging my knees beside the bed, speaking softly to Mom about very ordinary things, pierogi at the market, Brown's jackets, the church kids asking after her. I didn't talk about the money. I left it on paper for some morning bright enough to read it clearly. On the penultimate night, my phone vibrated. Phone banking reported a request to change the beneficiary on the POD account had been denied for lack of verification. I stood in the hallway, the glass reflecting the silhouettes of 2 people pushing carts past, the smell of coffee from the vending machine sharp and strong. I called immediately. The system read back the login IP, the call center woman's voice like reciting a poem. Address from Lakewood, Ohio. I gripped the edge of the counter and a sentence dropped to the bottom of my mind like a stone. Whose house, if not our own? I texted Sandra Klein, the probate attorney we'd arranged to see after the funeral. "Something is wrong with the pod. I need to see the audit." Sandra replied with a short line. "Keep everything as is. Don't touch anything more. See you tomorrow." I went back to Mom's room. Jordan was rolling up a blanket, his eyes not meeting mine. I poured water, set the cup on the tray, noticing my hands no longer shook like last week. I sat down, placed Mom's hand in my lap, gently stroked the bruised fingertips. "Mom, I will keep the papers in order. You just sleep." I didn't say forgive or anger, because both words are too noisy for a room with a slow beeping monitor. I only reminded myself of one sentence, like reciting a prayer. Record it, keep it, then go straight. As I left, the wind off Lake Erie slapped my face like a wake-up, and I knew the next day I would lay the flash drive on Ms. Sandra's desk, listen again to the bank's call center voice, look straight at the ATM frames at 0014, Utron 029. They were already red flags, not because of the red of panic, but because they point the way at night, go toward the truth. And I, like everyone in Cleveland, chose my way of walking, head down against the wind, clutching the notebook, taking short steps, but not retreating. The morning at the fraud desk of Great Lakes First Bank smelled of freshly printed paper and hastily brewed coffee, a scent that woke me more than the Lake Erie wind. Dev Patel offered his hand, eyes gentle like someone used to talking about things that aren't easy to hear. He pulled out a chair, flipped open his laptop, and showed me the midnight audit laid out like a steady heartbeat and then suddenly pounding. 7 consecutive withdrawals via ATMs on the same network to circumvent the per-transaction limit, totaling about $3,500 night, 4 nights in a row, $14,000. The rest couldn't be withdrawn because the attempt to change the beneficiary at Irso.03 was blocked. In the corner of the screen, another line lit up like a clock hand jerking to a halt at midnight. 0003. The IP address of Jordan's house, attempting to change the beneficiary online. Dev spoke slowly, as if afraid to drop a single word. We have sufficient transaction traces. Under Reg E, the unauthorized withdrawals before your mother passed can receive provisional credit after you sign an affidavit as the representative of the estate. We'll hold the temporary credit while coordinating the investigation. I nodded, thanked him for the simple wording and for the pair of hands always placed neatly on the table as if helping hold up what I hadn't yet managed to hold. We watched the ATM footage. The night frame broke into electronic snow. Jordan hunched forward, beanie pulled low, a hand covering half his face like someone avoiding rain. There were moments I wanted to close my eyes, but I kept myself looking straight. The ATM light swept across his collar, and a tattoo on his neck revealed a familiar curved fragment. I didn't cry. I only felt as if someone had pulled a heavy curtain, and the room revealed exactly what was inside it. No more, no less. Dev paused to let me breathe, then switched to the alerts tab. Every night in that same time window, the withdrawals ran in a straight line like tire tracks on snow. We'll flag it, but the first voice has to be yours, he reminded, handing me a thin affidavit form, a few lines stating the exact truth, and a place to sign. I held the paper like a handrail, knowing that in Cleveland people get through storms by holding on to the surest thing they have. In the afternoon, I went to a private notary office on an old stone street, together with Lieutenant Ruiz, Financial Fraud Unit, to check the notary journal that Jordan had once flaunted so confidently. The room was small, softly lit in yellow, with a few certificates framed on the wall. The notary opened the book, each page neatly handwritten, dates, names, signatures. She turned to the date Jordan said he took Mom to sign the POA, stopped, and knit her brows. Not there. This signature is not in my book. She pulled open a drawer and took out the seal. And the stamp on the paper they brought is not mine. The letter spacing is off. The borderline isn't right. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. The tiredness of someone who sees her profession used wrongly. I slid my chair back a little, as if to make room for the words to fall. Lieutenant Ruiz took photos, requested a certified copy, then wrote one concise line in the report. In that moment, I understood. The POA he bragged about was fake. And the date on that paper, I opened my phone, checked the ICU charting photo. My mother was sedated then, the monitor beeping slowly like a clock padded with cotton. I left the office and the Cleveland sky darkened like a blackboard wiped with charcoal. In my bag were 3 things light yet heavy: the unsigned affidavit, the list of documents Dev needed to keep the provisional reimbursement under Reg E, and a small slip of paper Ruiz pressed into my hand, the case number. So you can call to follow up. I stopped by a nearby church, sat in the last pew, not asking for miracles, only reciting the timeline like counting rosary beads from childhood. Email changed, 0003, whose IP, 0.14, 0.29, consecutive withdrawals, the tattoo appearing on video, empty notary journal, fake seal, ICU sedated. When I stood up, I knew I would do the only thing that keeps the spine straight, tell it exactly and fully. At night, I returned to Mom's house in Lakewood. opened the tin box of papers. Mom's sticky note still clung to the lid. This money is for you two to start your own lives when I'm gone. I placed it next to the affidavit, and two worlds touched. On one side, the slanted handwritten instruction of the one who has passed. On the other, the bold font form of the system. I poured tea, called Dev to confirm I'd stop by the bank in the morning to sign, then texted Sandra Klein. A notary confirms there is no signature of Mom. The seal is fake. Sending you photos of the report. On that date, Mom was sedated. I'll attach the charting. Sandra replied immediately, still in that steady tone. Good. You do the affidavit and police report. The rest I'll schedule with the bank and probate. On the table, the morning's flash drive lay next to Mom's old rosary. I touched each item lightly, no longer feeling my hands shake. Sometimes justice does not enter with trumpets. It steps in with timestamp logs, frames, notary book pages, and a confirming sentence. Not in my book. I am Nora. I am no longer racing the darkness. I turn on the light, square up the stack of papers, and let the crescendo of truth rise on its own, from the bank's midnight audit to the empty notary journal, and then flow to a single place. Keeping my mother's name on what she set aside for us, by reading aloud what the papers have quietly remembered. I note separately, POA signed when mother lacks capacity. In the morning, the notary journal will say a sentence with enough weight. Not in my book. The afternoon of the will reading, Miss Sandra Klein's office was lit just enough, like a murmuring autumn day by Lake Erie. A soft yellow desk lamp, the heater breathing lightly, the faint scent of freshly printed paper and stamp ink. On the desk was a neatly clipped stack of files, the corner tab labeled Marion Blake, Probate. Beside it was the old tin box Mom always used to store bills, now lying still like a closed-lid instruction. I sat opposite, both hands stacked to keep from shaking, listening to the clock hand tick forward notch by notch. Ms. Sandra opened the file, her voice even and clear, reading the basic provisions like someone tidying the kitchen after a big meal. The will leaves all assets subject to probate in a 50-50 proportion to the two children. I nodded. Not out of surprise, but because I recognized my mother's voice somewhere in the words, divide equally, neat, without favoritism. She turned another page, touched it lightly with her pen as a mark. As for the pod savings, the payable on death account, by principle it does not pass through the will, and will pay directly to my children equally as the original beneficiaries. She looked up, eyes gentle but firm. The issue is, that account is empty. The air in the room sagged as if someone had pulled a sleeve over a window pane. The chair creaked. Jordan sprang up, face flushed. Mom gave authority to me. Nora, just wants money. The word money crashed like glass, spreading to all four walls. I didn't answer. I remembered the flash drive from this morning, the ATM frame showing the sliver of a tattoo on the neck, the audit line frozen at 003, remembered the empty notary journal, and the stamp pointed out as fake. I looked at the old tin box, the lid bearing a diagonal scratch from the year Mom slipped, and it was as if I could see Mom's handwriting on a sticky note. This money is for the two of you to start your own lives. Ms. Sandra set down another sheet, her voice still calm. We do not argue here. I only record the facts. The POD should have transferred per the designation, my children equally, but the balance was withdrawn completely before Ms. Marion passed away. The bank has provided the midnight audit. The next verification will be based on the affidavit and the investigative file. I heard the words before, like a thin blade gliding across the back of my hand, not bleeding, but seeping cold. Jordan gave a harsh laugh, turned to me. Mom gave me the card. She wanted me to handle things. I inhaled through my nose, slowly so the air could travel the full path into my lungs. If so, Ms. Sandra asked, why does your home IP appear in the beneficiary changelog at 0.03? A short silence, exactly as long as 3 monitor beeps I had listened to for 2 weeks. Jordan looked at the floor, then at me, his eyes searching for an exit on a wall with no door. I did not move my chair, nor my tone. I only spoke loud enough to hear. I don't want Mom's money that way. I want my mother's promise to go all the way of its path. Ms. Sandra nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a sentence that had struck the heart of the file. Outside the window, the Lake Erie wind hissed through the window seam, touching the curtain edge and leaving a fine tremble. I remembered Mom's bruised fingertips at the hospice, remembered my hand rubbing those bruises and silently promising, I will keep the papers in order. Now that promise lay on the table as timestamps, frames, the notary's confirmation, and one simple keyword: empty. Emotional drop. That's what I called the feeling inside me. Not a plunge into a chasm, but realizing the floor beneath your feet has changed. Solid. No more illusions. I lost my mother. I do not want to lose, in addition, the meaning of the money she saved. Pod is not just 3 letters. To us, it is how Mom said. I think for the 2 of you when I can no longer speak. As we left the room, Jordan shrugged his shoulders and went ahead, the door closing with the dry, thin sound of the latch touching the frame. Ms. Sandra handed me a thin envelope. The next appointment, the list of documents to submit, a reminder to make the affidavit and contact the fraud desk. She spoke softly. I understand the pain here is not because of a number. It is because of a promise. I hugged the file to my chest, thanked her, then stepped into the hallway. Early afternoon light fell on the tile floor like neat squares. In my head, a sentence came on its own, bowing yet standing straight. Pod is the promise Mom left. Someone broke that promise while she was still on the ventilator. I will splice that promise back together by telling it exactly, submitting it exactly, and keeping it exactly, sheet by sheet, hour by hour, step by step. From the afternoon of the will reading into the following days, everything sped up like Cleveland bracing for a lake storm. The wind hissed louder, but we walked in a straight line. My foursome formed naturally. Me, Dev Patel at the fraud desk, Lieutenant Ruiz in financial crimes, and Sandra Klein handling probate. Dev spoke first, voice low and steady. His side had escalated internally to the compliance department. Lieutenant Ruiz would seek a subpoena. The bank would provide logs, eyepiece footage pursuant to the order. We tell it by timestamps, Dev said, and then let the system confirm. I nodded, seeing in his eyes the calm of someone used to stacking bricks on a levee. Lieutenant Ruiz entered like a door swinging open, working with the Cleveland PD Financial Crimes Unit to define the case. Theft of an elderly person's property, identity fraud. Words I didn't want tied to family, but which had to be called by their right names so the road ahead would have signposts. Sandra filed a motion, a preservation order. Freeze and escrow. Escrow. The disputed funds in probate pending equitable relief. At the same time requesting the civil division to impose a constructive trust if needed. Simply put, a freeze and hold on the funds already withdrawn, so that when the proof is complete, the money will go back to the right place. The estate pod as Mom intended. I, the small but important part, ran back to the hospice to request the chart. Patient is sedated, lacks capacity to consent. With the nurse's note as witness, the papers were thin as leaf blades, but at a touch, you knew they wouldn't tear. In the evening, I arranged everything into a hard folder. On the left, the midnight audit with the 00.14, 000.29 timestamps. On the right, the ATM photo revealing a fragment of a tattoo. In the center, the 0003 line attempting to change the beneficiary from Jordan's home IP. I stuck on a small yellow slip. Call this a story of time. In my head, Mom's voice was still calm. For the two of you. There were moments when grief lay over my chest like a thin sheet of ice, but my hands still had work to do. Tell it exactly, submit it exactly, and keep it exactly. Night fell, and Lieutenant Ruiz knocked on Jordan's door with a search warrant. I didn't go along. I stood at the end of the street, where the sodium lights made the old snow on the curb glitter like salt. Ruiz called with a brief, unembellished update. Seize the phone and laptop. A moment later, he texted a few more words like loosening the knot of a rope cinched for a long time. On the laptop, there's an autofill for your mother's online banking login, a file named beneficiary pogchangedraft.pdf, and photos of your mother's ID taken with Jordan's phone. I leaned against the utility pole, inhaled deeply, heard the blood in my ears like the lake slapping the shore. There was nothing left to call spam, only traces. The next morning, I sat with Dev in the familiar coffee-scented room, signed the affidavit, a thin sheet recounting exactly what had happened, from the email being changed to the card being withdrawn, from the midnight texts to Mom's bruised fingertips. Dev slid a pad under my hand so the writing wouldn't shake, then clipped it. Good. The provisional credit will be maintained during the investigation. The remaining restoration, the court and probate will carry forward. At noon, Sandra emailed confirmation that the motion had been calendared, with a final line. Keep the tempo, you're doing it right. In the afternoon, Ruiz forwarded the official case number. I filed it in the top corner of the folder, the most visible spot. Like Clevelanders hanging a raincoat right by the door when they know it'll rain tomorrow. At night, I opened the old tin box, placed Mom's sticky note next to Sandra's motion. Two worlds touched. On one side, my mother's slanted handwriting, on the other, the system's squared letters, and I was in the middle, making the bridge. I thought of Jordan, of the years he drove Mom to her appointments, of the moment he tucked the envelope into his coat. The anger thinned into a narrow line, beneath it a resolve that made no noise. Move on. I poured tea, added one more line to the notebook. Today, the storm's winds eased because the papers knew the way. Then I turned off the lights, closed the door, and heard the latch go click, small but sure, like the way each piece of evidence, each signature, each timestamp log was closing around a story that once seemed to flow away. In Cleveland, people love by doing things on time. I will love my mother that way, carefully, patiently, and with a straight back through the steepest part of the truth. The papers know the way. Now it's my breathing's turn. Life's rhythms settled like a lake after wind, but my hands didn't leave the work. At night, I took the shift at Metro Health. Bright white hallways, monitors softly beeping, coffee in the pot always stronger than necessary. Between 2 rounds of checks, I opened the hardcover notebook, marked the key milestones with a lemon-scented highlighter. The email was changed, the withdrawal time window, the last time I saw the bank envelope in the pocket of Jordan's coat. I learned to breathe slowly, count 4 beats in, 6 beats out, then write one short line, sufficient in meaning, without excess emotion. When the night shift ended, I caught the bus back to Lakewood, arms holding a bundle of papers like hugging a hot water bottle in winter, warming and reminding myself not to let go. In the afternoon, the kitchen table became a classroom. Sandra laid out the file, using very everyday words. Probate is the court process confirming the estate. POD is a payable on death account. Doesn't go through the will, transfers directly per designation. A constructive trust is a court measure to hold the money that was withdrawn improperly, to return it to the right place. I repeated each concept, wrote them into 3 big lines with a marker, and stuck them on the fridge next to Mom's old sticky note. Sandra underlined, "Your job is not to let the story get pulled into arguments. Your job is to use the right terms, in the right order." I nodded, feeling my spine a little straighter. Then Dev's turn. We sat at a quiet teller desk, and he guided me to complete the Reg E claim, a form for the bank to provisionally reimburse when there are unauthorized withdrawals. "Your part," Dev said, "is the affidavit. Tell it accurately, fully, with timestamps. The bank's part is to hold the provisional credit and coordinate the investigation." He checked once more. ATM photos, IP logs, the withdrawal timetable, the hospice medical note stating, "Patient is sedated, lacks capacity to consent." I added the nurse witness statement, the confirmation from the nurse present that day, and clipped it to the outermost folder. We didn't use big words. We used hours and clear names. At night, when the house was quiet, I opened my phone and made a list of questions no longer than one screen. Who changed the email? At what time? From which device? Where are the logs stored? Through whose hands has the chain of custody of these documents passed? I learned how to request copies in the correct format, ask for stamps, dates, and the printer's name. Learned how to write emails short but tight. 1 opening line, 3 main points, 1 polite deadline. I found myself less shaky when hearing the bank alert tone. Instead of fear, I asked one more question, then waited for an answer with a signature. Sometimes I sat alone before Mom's tin box, hand stroking the old scratch on the lid, whispering, "Mom taught savings. I will learn to keep things in the right place." Saving is not only gathering loose change into a jar, it is preserving the full meaning of that money, traveling the route Mom laid out, stopping at the station named The Two Children. I wasn't looking for a fiery win or loss. I prepared the final strike with small things, sleeping a full 4 hours, eating a bowl of hot soup before writing, rechecking each sheet under the yellow light. When I stuck the checklist on the cabinet door, I smiled at hearing my voice in my head again. Ask questions, request logs, demand chain of custody, and always remember, kindness also needs a record. Tomorrow morning, the probate hall will turn each page like turning lake ice crust. The probate court lobby in the morning was as cold as a whetstone, wind from Lake Erie pouring through the revolving door making everyone pull their collars up. The smell of vending machine coffee mixed with the damp wool of heavy coats. Shoes crusted with road salt rasped on the stone floor. Relatives stood in small clusters. The murmuring stopped when Jordan walked in with a civil attorney, his eyes skittering away as if afraid of meeting a mirror. I hugged the file folder to my chest, breathed deep to warm my lungs. On the wall was the sign, "Please turn off cell phones." The clock hand ticked 1 notch audibly. Dev brought a numbered exhibit board. We reviewed quickly in the lobby before submitting it into the hearing record. The night frame, the moss-stained wallmark behind the machine, and the small neck tattoo showing clearer than any defense. The photo corner capturing the timestamp aligned with the midnight audit the bank had sent. "We speak by timestamps," Dev whispered in my ear very softly, like reminding how to breathe when swimming in a cold lake. Lieutenant Ruiz appeared, gloves holding a thick packet, handed it to the ADA. Inside were the IP logs, the record of the 00003 beneficiary change attempt, and the notary's letter confirming that signature is not in the book. The seal is fake. The assistant county prosecutor only attended as an observer due to a parallel criminal file, did not present. The pen tapped lightly on the 0.03 box like tapping a rhythm on the morning's spine. I looked around. A few men in orange-brown Browns jackets, bright scarves, Someone's little girl obediently hugging a cup of hot chocolate. I told myself silently to steady my nerves. Cleveland doesn't like drama. But today, the courthouse lobby is as crowded as a Browns game. Jordan stopped right in front of the poster, turned his face away when passing the ATM photos, then glanced at me. I didn't avoid it. I only gripped the folder edge tighter to remember I came here for the promise on Mom's sticky note on the tin box lid. Dev pointed to the photo corner with a peeling paint streak matching the scene survey photo. Ruiz added, "On the seized laptop there's a file named Beneficiary Gihar Change Talks Draft Aside PDF and autofill for Ms. Marion's online banking login." Jordan's public defender said something quietly. The ADA answered briefly, opening the packet like opening a toolkit already arranged. Everything in the right place. None of us raised our voices. The file changed the voice. The relatives began to understand when Dev rotated the photo, pointing out the chain of 7 consecutive withdrawals to skirt the per-transaction limit. $3,500 each night, 4 nights in a row. Numbers lined up like footprints on snow not yet melted. I heard someone exhale sharply, not because of the money, but because of recognizing the timing. When Mom was still lying sedated, the monitor beeping slowly in the hospice room. I stepped back half a step to make way for an elderly man to pass, his hand brushing my elbow lightly, enough to make me feel I was still a daughter in this city, and not just a stack of files. The ADA folded the packet, said, "We will move to maintain the financial status quo until the court rules. The withdrawals will be placed under a constructive trust." I nodded, my eyes still on the ATM photo. I didn't need Jordan to explain. The traces had spoken. In the cold hissing through the door seam, I suddenly remembered Mom assembling Jell-O salad and reminding, "This money is for the 2 of you to start your own lives." I will keep that sentence in line with the timestamps, the photos, and the confirmations, without raising my voice, without trembling hands. When the loudspeaker called our case, I stood up, the file folder in my hand like a second coat. Warm because the truth was in the right place, and just heavy enough for me to walk slowly without retreating. In the courtroom, 1 sentence is enough to set the stone path back. The probate courtroom at noon today was softly lit through window panes filmed with salt snow, the ceiling fan turning slowly like the steady breathing of someone who has traveled a long way. I sat on the petitioner's side with Ms. Sandra, arms hugging a file folder worn at the edges. Opposite was Jordan, pale, his heavy coat unable to fend off the spine-deep cold of a truth about to be named. Judge DeSalvo listened to Ms. Sandra's presentation, her voice low and clear as if arranging items back on a shelf. The account opening documents printed the words, "Intended beneficiaries, children equally," meaning my mother's POD, per the original intent, was to be divided equally between the 2 children. She set another sheet on the lectern, her finger tapping lightly on the timeline. The withdrawals occurred right during the period when the account holder lacked capacity, accompanied by a fake POA to clear the way. "This is conversion and evidence of undue influence," she said without cumbersome jargon. "Everyone understands it as forcing a change to my mother's wishes." She requested the court impose a constructive trust, a legal cage to hold the improperly withdrawn funds and return them to the estate pod pool for proper division as Mom intended. Dev Patel stepped up and opened the poster. The midnight audit lined up like footprints in snow. 7 withdrawals to skirt the per-transaction limit, $3,500 each night, 4 nights in a row. An ATM frame capturing the neck tattoo in full. The SOR report filed. And the Reg E component, "The bank has provisionally reimbursed per procedure, pending the ruling," he said. Next came Lieutenant Ruiz, who set down the evidence packet. IP logs, the 00.103 attempt to change the beneficiary from Jordan's home. The notary's letter confirming my mother's signature is not in the book, and the seal is fake, concluding with a sentence as dry as a ballpoint line on carbon paper. The conduct matches the elements of theft from an elderly person, identity fraud, and document forgery. The criminal portion will be referred to the county prosecutor. I looked down at my hands, the fingertips still nicked from labeling the files, and felt the anger subside, leaving only a thin line of resolve. The judge leaned back, stayed silent long enough to hear clearly the ticking of the second hand, then read the ruling. The court orders $98,400 plus interest to be frozen and escrowed into a court-designated account, to be divided 50-50 per the POD designation. The equitable relief constructive trust is referred to the civil division to complete procedures under its jurisdiction. An order is issued barring access to all related accounts and documents during resolution. The criminal file is referred to the county prosecutor for review. Each phrase fell like a stone resetting the path, straight, level, and firm enough to walk on. I heard a soft exhale from the rows behind. Relatives, church acquaintances. No one applauded. Cleveland doesn't like theatrics. But I knew everyone understood. Jordan turned to me, lips trembling, speaking softly as if to himself. I am afraid of being poor. That sentence excuses nothing. But I still heard in it the childhood of the two of us, the long winters, the gas stove clicking, Mom counting each pay stub. I answered by not adding fuel to the fire. I kept silent. And I am afraid of losing my mother a second time, losing even her intent. Money can be earned again, losing the meaning of the money Mom saved. That is a second kind of mourning I do not accept. As the clerk stamped the case closed, Ms. Sandra touched my elbow lightly. The court's portion is done. What remains? Divide correctly, keep correctly. Dev folded the poster. Ruiz handed the ADA one more copy. Everything returned to order like a newly arranged file shelf. I held the order and set it next to the sticky note I had brought, the slanted handwriting of my mother. This money is for the two of you to start your own lives. Outside, the lake wind hissed through the crack, biting but clear. I stepped out and saw the city as it had been, the Browns' orange-brown coats, the vending machine coffee smell, the crunch of road salt underfoot. Only one thing was different. My mother's promise had been set back in its right place, by timestamps, records, and a ruling that didn't need to shout. I breathed deep to fill my lungs with cold air, and knew that from today on I would say my mother's name in the most ordinary voice, without trembling, without sharpness, because justice had chosen the right channel to flow. In the pale afternoon sun at Edgewater Park, the wind off the lake made the grass ripple like long sighs. I opened the lid of the small urn and scattered a pinch of ashes where my mother used to walk every evening. The smell of damp grass blended with a very faint salt scent, and I spoke to my mother, not loudly, just enough for myself to hear. Mom, I have put everything back in its proper place. There was no applause, no stage lights, just an order, a few blue seals, and the feeling of my shoulders growing light when the POD funds had returned, to be divided equally as my mother instructed. I set aside a portion to establish the Marion Blake Nursing Scholarship at Metro Health, a small amount for someone to learn how to care for others, as I cared for my mother with clumsy but patient hands. If you are watching this segment, I want you to know, the journey just past was not about winning or losing, but about preserving the wishes of a woman who lived simply and neatly. Thank you for walking with me to the very last minute, for listening, for believing, for reminding me to take a deep breath when the lake rose with wind. Your support is the reason I dared to tell this story in the most ordinary voice. If this story touches you, Please subscribe to the channel, like and share so that more families can keep what belongs to them. Comment Cleveland if you're watching from the Midwest, so I'll know we're standing close to each other on the same windbridge. And if you've ever seen someone mess with the money of the elderly, tell me what you did, so that next time, another child can boldly ask questions, request logs, and walk up to the bank counter with a straight back. Thank you, truly.